So the topic for discussion today is transforming healthcare. And when you say transforming, you're really talking about radical change. You're not talking about incremental change, okay? And incidental AI and large-scale analytics are basically part of that particular exercise to essentially transform. So why are we really talking about transforming healthcare? I'm sure everybody is familiar in one way or the other with healthcare right now. Has personal experiences on what they basically achieved out there. If you actually look at it, we are spending about $3.65 trillion a year on healthcare, which roughly translates to about over 11,000 per person out there. The important thing is it's between 2017 and 2018 that grew by 4%, and it's expected to rise by over 5% out here. Okay, thanks. So we all view healthcare as a cost burden, and we all have differential experiences in healthcare. Now, having worked in a lot of hospitals around the world, okay, doing deep workflow studies, I can tell you that healthcare also has probably one of the most dedicated professionals that really take care, and go by the adage, do no harm. And yet, there is harm that basically is caused in the healthcare system out here. So, what are the issues out there? They want to basically improve the patient experience, okay? We all want to see improve the health of the population so you can bring down the cost, okay? Or, reduce the clinician or staff burnout. This is basically the quadruple aim, as is called in healthcare out there. So we look at technology to see how we can actually drive towards these goals. If I actually look at an IntelliH paper, I'm going to read this out here. It says, and that points to a particular problem that probably AI could potentially try to look at solving out here. They say because medicine is a profession, and because of the special privileges granted to physicians by society, quality-based principles that evolved in the manufacturing business have been difficult to adapt in the medical practice. And by the way, this exact principle was tried out at Geisinger, who actually did a CMM study for their cardiac practice, and fairly successfully they improved dramatically a lot of the outcomes out there. Okay. But it goes on to say, physicians learn from other physicians and medical literature. This leads to a wide variation in what is considered best practice. Variation has complex association, including the variation in expert opinion, the complexity of medical knowledge, the variation in physician decision-making potential, and human error. And this is essentially what leads to some of the challenges in healthcare. Some of those that we've addressed very successfully in manufacturing, leveraging standardization and process control or process management out there. It actually goes on to quote that guidelines or algorithms are a strategy that are finding favor as a solution. The control of variation through guideline development, iterative refinement of the guidelines, and feedback to physicians will actually improve the medical practice. So by removing variations, physicians can honor the fiduciary trust that they have made to patients, make reasoned decisions, improve outcomes, and focus attention on medical improvements. So I'm very pleased to moderate this particular panel. We got a very experienced panel out here of practitioners who've been deeply involved in healthcare systems out here. And I'm going to introduce them. Ellen Campana, PhD, is a director in KPMG's Lighthouse Center of Excellence with over 20 years of experience in natural language processing and conversational AI implementation, okay, long before Siri and all became fashionable out here, okay. And deployment. Prior to joining KPMG, she developed systems at NASA, Intel, and big data healthcare startup Apixio. Now based out of KPMG's Silicon Valley office, she drives innovation of Omnichannel, customer experience for large clients in healthcare, finance, and government globally. Next we have Pushkar Singh. He's the VP engineering at Glooko, which is a technology leader with proven track record of building products in digital health, consumer electronics, fintech, and cloud-based SaaS platforms. He has led globally distributed engineering teams to help drive innovation and product developments at companies, including co-founded startups with successful exits and large public companies. And for those who don't know, Glooko actually does a lot of work in chronic care patient management. Okay. Bidyut Parruck is the VP and Business Development Head at Cortina. He's an accomplished senior executive, proven track record of technical and business leadership, and developer of cloud-based healthcare software solutions. He's also a CTO at Interface ED Solutions, which has deployed an expert system for ER physicians at local hospitals. He has also mentored multiple healthcare startups using AI at IIT Startups. He's an accomplished executive with a track record of technical and business leadership, having founded multiple successful startup companies, raised funding, and seen many exits, including an IPO. He is currently exploring a healthcare application using AutoML. So welcome to the panel out here, fellow panelists. So I'm going to basically look at, addressing a lot of questions out here that I have. I have quite a lot of questions out here. And healthcare and AI, I can promise you, has more questions than answers at this point of time. So we'll try to ask those questions, and we'll see if we can get many of those answers that we're actually looking at, from a healthcare panel perspective out here. So we know that AI can solve a lot of problems, particularly in healthcare. You've got roles in diagnosis, you've got them in clinical decision making, which is actually fairly relevant. Personalized medicine, we hear a lot about personalized medicines out here. And there's a lot of buzz out here. There's a lot of buzz, AI and this thing. In fact, there's a very robust investment happening in the sphere of healthcare, okay? In particularly companies that are actually focused in AI and big data out there, or analytics. In fact, as of recently, about $37.5 billion has been spent or has been provided to startups in healthcare, okay? Of which, there are at least 15 unicorns in the healthcare startup space right now, okay? So these are lesser known facts out here. So, my question out here is basically a question to all the panelists, and I'll ask them separately, is, what makes AI so attractive to healthcare? Anyone can start.
So I think I'm personally very happy to see a lot of digital innovation happening in healthcare. In past, I have seen that healthcare was kind of like a second-class citizen in terms of innovation, and for past few years, a lot of things are happening. Now, AI can dramatically change a lot of things, the workflow efficiency, how we know that there are 3 physicians per 1,000 patients in US, for example. There's only 5,000 endos right now. And how we can make that process more efficient so that physicians can see more patients. AI can be helping, like, be an AI assistant. Like, so for example, physician is seeing some patient and we can have all the information ready for the physician before he sees them. And also, I think the biggest challenge which I think AI can solve is a continuity of care. When a patient goes out of a hospital system, right now I see a lot of this care is very episodic, and can we have a continuity of the care when patient is at their home? So those are a few things which is very near and dear to me. Yeah.
I guess I would add that one of the things that I have heard a lot of people saying is that one thing that drives their interest in AI is an interest in sort of standardizing care across the community and making sure that they're reaching all of their customers, and that looking at some of these technologies that will actually be able to proactively reach out and get that customer into the door when they need to be there, rather than 3 weeks later when they're suffering from a much more acute illness. And so this is something that's an additional inspiring area that people are excited about.
I guess in terms of adaptation, one of the biggest area is in the radiology, in terms of being able to, first when the AI came along, machine learning and image processing came along, people thought it's going to replace all radiologists. In reality, what it's actually being able to do is deal with pinpointing areas of things which people can see. Now, technology-wise, it's actually ready, but in terms of actual deployment in a big, large healthcare systems, it's a whole different story. And the similar stuff happens in areas like, for example, I've seen people being able to detect cancer cells versus non-cancer cells a lot more effectively, or being able to see diseases in the retina a lot better with AI. But these are all image recognition, video recognition applications, which is pretty mature from the AI perspective. But actual deployment is a whole different story.
Perfect. So, yeah, I think I can talk out here, and I think you guys can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Perfect.
We have
right.
microphones.
So, you can share the mic.
We have
I
microphones.
think we all have mics too.
We all have mics too?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Only Pushkar. Yeah.
I don't have ones.
Okay.
Only Pushkar needs.
Perfect. So here's a question for you, Pushkar. Pushkar, you've been in the space of chronic care patient management. We look at this, about $2 trillion actually goes into the spend on chronic care patients right now. In the US, we've got about 133 million patients who are chronic. That's about 40% of the population, okay? And if you look at this, about 30 million have 5 or more conditions, okay? So let's start with trying to address that. And I said that there was this quadruple aim. One was cost, which is the government's concern out there, but there's patients from patient's perspective. Outcome is another concern out there. So let's try and see from your perspective, how do you see AI, big data, analytics helping you try and address this problem? A, of the spend, the $133 million, and B, how do you start reducing the amount of, or the population health that is moving towards becoming chronic over a period of time or two?
Sure, definitely. So I think what we need to understand that I'm in a diabetes space, so I'll probably take some examples from that space. The bulk of the cost is from the complications which arises from diabetes. It's not your regular cost of your test strips or your medications, you take metformins or any other insulin, for example. Those are not the highest cost. The cost is when something happens. Maybe you have a hypo and you end up in a ER, or because of a complication, you have amputation of your limb, for example. Those are the high cost factors. Mm-hmm. Now, those can be definitely addressed by having taking all this connected health, which we have today, and make sure that we are monitoring the patient, not just when he's visiting the clinic, but when he's at home. That's, I think, one of the biggest help which AI can do right now. And the other thing which, as we know, that 30 million diabetes patients are right now in the US, but there are 70 million are pre-diabetic. Yeah. Now, are we waiting for them to get into that state and then we incur certain cost of healthcare? Because once they become diabetic, they will definitely then, you have to have a certain spend on them. So what we can do to prevent that, we know that yes, when someone is prone to having diabetes, they will get it at some point in time, but can we postpone the onset of that? Are we doing something to proactively looking at that? The other part to this is what are we doing in terms of making the care very personalized? I give an example, my own example here, so if I'm running a high blood sugar for a month, 160 or 180, I go to my PCP and say, okay, this is what is going on. His immediate standard of care will be, okay, now I'm going to move you from 500 milligram of metformin to 1,000 milligram of metformin. But no one looking at, okay, why I'm having this for last 1 month. Maybe I'm not sleeping well. Maybe I'm having some pain in somewhere, and because of that my sleep pattern is disturbed. Maybe I'm traveling. So right now we are not looking at a patient from a different angles in terms of what all can be happening in this person's life. And given all this connected health, all the sensors out there and the data which is coming in, we can make it very personalized for our patient, and this will all definitely reduce the cost eventually.
So I have a follow-up out here. Since you basically mentioned this whole question of, let's say, compliance to a care plan, right? A care regime, right? This is essentially where we're really talking about, especially in chronic conditions out here. Now, we know that in a chronic situation, only 20% of the contributory factors to disease is clinical. 80% is non-clinical. It's your lifestyle, it's what you do, it's what you eat, it's what you smoke, it's what your recreational activities, your sleep, etc., etc. So when you look at treating this particular paradigm, now you're really talking about bringing 80% of additional data into this whole mix out here. What do you see the challenges in that, in trying to bring, let's say, and anybody can address this question out here from the perspective that, how do you basically bring clinical data and mix it with non-clinical data out here, lifestyle data?
I'd like to answer this because it's an omnichannel question.
Yes.
Because this is a challenge that we have every time we're trying to bring data together, is trying to understand, whether it's just the clinical data coming in from two different doctors. You have to understand how that data fits together and get it in the eyes of the care providers right away, at the right time and place, in a way that they can consume it in time to do something with it. And so as we see the set of data sources growing, it's going to be more and more important to develop analytics and tools that go all the way to delivering the right kind of data to the right people at the right time in order to realize that value. Following that crisp DM structure is really important, understanding each source of data, and then really making sure that you pay attention to the quality, and then model it and slowly add different channels and standardize your process as you go. And so this is something I think we're going to see a huge emphasis on in the coming years.
Yeah, I just want to add
Yes.
I think I'm fine, right?
Oh, yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
No,
Everybody can hear you.
all right. I know. I can just speak. So the only thing I want to add is I actually heard this from a physician's point of view, and their perspective is, hey, you're giving me more and more data. I have already too little time to do anything. Okay, and from their perspective, really is, can we actually go from big data to small data? Is what the most important part for them is. What is relevant is what they want to see, like trends and graphs. But even you go in with a whole bunch of paper, they have no, they have to spend the time and look at it, but that doesn't help them in their decision making.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think that's a valid point. I think the physicians, they do not have time to look at the large amount of data they have. What AI can do is create actionable insights out of this large amount of data set, so that they can look at it and review it and make some recommendations for the patient.
So we will discuss data in great detail, because data is healthy and unhealthy, especially in healthcare, and very emotive out there, okay? So we will have a separate section on that. But Bidyut, before I get to data, and as we talk about transformations that are taking place, if you look at it, we also know that 40% of the spend in healthcare is avoidable. It's waste, okay? It's a well-documented fact out here, right? So when you start looking at operations out there, and we know that where there will be the least resistance for adoption of AI, analytics, ML, or any of those things, would be in operational efficiencies out there, right? How do you basically, for example, alarms? If you look at alarms in a hospital, 80% of them do not need an action out there, right? Or how do you drive better operational efficiencies inside a particular facility? So my question out here is, from your perspective, how do you look at technology coming and improving the operational efficiencies and helping avoid that, for at least a big percentage of that 40% waste that goes in the healthcare system out there?
It's actually interesting. It will lead us back to data. but before we go there,
Yes.
okay, let us first look at the alarms as you talked about,
Yeah.
okay? And I work a lot with the ER doctors, so I have a lot of experience being in emergency room, seeing what's happening, okay? And one of the things you see, issues they have, is they have this board which kind of is tracking all the patients, at what the conditions are and so on. And the alarms are constantly going off, and they just ignore it. Mm-hmm. Whereas there are things like from somebody is in a shock, or somebody is in a
trauma or a sepsis risk. These are real items, okay? Unfortunately, the tracker board does not have access to things like, vitals, their EHR and so on, to take all of that data and provide something which is very relevant. So from their perspective, it's going to be very, very useful to have those kind of, life-threatening issues which show up and deal with. And now going back to the other side of it, okay? So as I work with my physician counterparts, what I look at is what they get every day. One of the guys who runs an ER in a local hospital, he gets about an update of a 10, 11 spreadsheets every day, which he has to go through, okay? And there are about 1,000+ matrices they are tracking. So inside the healthcare systems, they already have quite a bit of data and data collection on the operations side they're collecting. Things like, what time does it take for somebody to go from time to greet, time to order, when essentially they're writing prescriptions for all the tests, and eventually, time to discharge, right? Or time to definitive provider, which is the person who is going to be responsible and take care of you. So all of these things they're tracking. And unfortunately, there's so much data is coming at them, there's very little they can actually do. And literally, a few matrices every day is all somebody can really look at. So it is a big data problem. It's has not been solved yet. And definitely, hospitals are very interested in solving that.
So is it the silos and the time frames, the different?
It's the time frame. It's actually the time frame. So essentially, the data they're getting is a day old, always. Okay.
Right.
It's never real time, and that the other piece has to happen.
Right.
So I have a question for you, Ellen, and this is basically, and we'll talk about data because data is here. And I also want to be very cognizant of the fact that the audience will have questions, so I want to leave enough time to the audience. So we'll just speed this up a little bit, okay? Your experience with audio or with chatbots and all of that stuff out there, right? Just a question that came in my mind: virtual avatars,
Okay.
right? How do you see that impacting or improving, let's say, or removing the personal experience of patients with with the healthcare system out there? Let's address the gamut of this thing. Number one, the use.
Do you mean
Let's
conversational AI with a body?
Absolutely, yes, with a bot.
With a body or a bot?
With a bot.
Yeah.
Virtual, yeah, okay.
So I think people are rapidly beginning to understand the difference between humans and machines, and I think people are coming to a point where they're kind of realizing that it's important to maintain trust with people, that you build your system so that they're constantly telling people, I'm a bot or not. And so I think people will have a different experience with the bots, with the agents, than they will with a human.
Okay.
And I think that the effectiveness is really going to be back to the data and the details about can we take that conversation and immediately understand what is meant, because when people are talking, using their voice conversationally to like an in-care agent, they're going to use language that is much more vague and much more context-driven. And so we're going to have to develop new technologies that are able to take that context into account. So if they say, hand me that thing, the system has to start understanding where did they point, what are they talking about. And so there's going to be a whole new set of advances. I mean, the AI field is ready for them.
Okay.
We have been for a while, but they haven't been operationalized and put into practice and used to get the right information to the right place at the right time.
So will AI, will AI cause the human contact to decrease in healthcare, or over a period of time?
Which kind of contact? I think it will raise the value of the true human contact.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So let's get to trust and credibility, right? And I'm going to have a very interesting question out here for the panel out here. Let's assume that I go to a physician and I get a diagnosis out there. And then the computer, my smart, AI computer, Dr. AI, gives me another recommendation out there, right? And my AI computer has basically seen over 1 trillion data sources to come to that particular conclusion, okay? Who would you trust? Your physician or the AI diagnosis? It's a question.
All right.
Exactly.
Who wrote
This
the
is a similar
system?
question like about autonomous cars. Like if you want to go to airport and there is a driverless car comes at your door, what do you do? Like, okay, will you step into it or go to the airport? What do you like to do? So I think personally, I believe if we think that AI will replace physicians, no, I think it will not happen. What AI can do definitely is that they will augment these physicians to have better decisions. And you hear this stats that, okay, there are 5% top surgeons in the US right now. Now, why there are only 5%? Why can't be there 50%? How we make that 5% to 50%?
See, I was looking at verifiability, okay? Because if it has looked at 1 trillion data points, I essentially want to know why it reached that conclusion. And in today's world also, if a doctor gives me a prognosis, I always have a second opinion option available out there, right? And I want to basically get an informed decision. Right?
Trust is a track record.
Absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
not like a point decision.
Well, so here's the deal. I mean,
Sorry.
So what I wanted to add to that, essentially, really ultimately, you're going to take the data you get from the AI engine and have a discussion with your physician. That is what you would do. Okay. The reality is, okay, and this is something unfortunately is real in the healthcare organization. There is the top few doctors who are really, really good, and then you have the middle, which is pretty large, okay? And so a lot of the stuff we do, we bring in that expertise into the technology to help that, right? Scenario. And so there is definitely value to having the expertise there.
Yeah, so the last question that I have is related to data, which is basically bias, okay? Bias in data, ethics related to data, okay? Each of you, any commentary on, when you start building these smart algorithms out there, right? How do we avoid bias in the data, okay? Because we know what the data situation in healthcare is, okay?
This is a really important and timely question that we should all be thinking about and thinking through, because bias is incredibly important, especially when people's lives are on the line in healthcare. So I think it comes down to having a robust set of controls around your AI and a bunch of different eyes looking at it from different perspectives to make sure that you're not being disproportionate in your coverage, and also developing actually like test cases and auditing your systems. For instance, when I work with customers to develop speech technology, building a test set that we're sure has voices from a representative sampling that we can test to say, is this effective at capturing the voices of all of your customers, or is it biased? And those kinds of test cases can help.
Yes. So I think bias is definitely it's a big factor, but I'll take a step back. Right now, I think one of the biggest challenges is that the data is heavily siloed right now, and we struggle a lot of time. Is it a device manufacturer's data? Is it pharma's data? Is it health systems data? Is it data from the device or say some other entity? And this is already heavily siloed. We firmly believe that it's patient data, and patients should be able to give this data access to anyone they want to. But right now, we have seen that, at least in healthcare, that data is not even it's very heavily siloed right now.
So thank you. We'd love to basically see healthcare go to zero preventable harm. And before we step aside, let's take a few audience questions out there. I hear that. Okay.
So my name is Atal, and my question is, I was reading a few days back that the top 15 unicorns in healthcare have a valuation of 50 billion, while top 2 companies, like one in one in like eBay, which is Jews, and another company in gaming has the same valuation of 50 billion. So I want to understand like how you look at it from an investment perspective. Do we want our next generation to go towards vaping and gaming than to help in investing?
So, it's a question. I mean, if you look at it, okay. If you look at it in any industry out there, you'll find examples of unreasonable valuations going to unreasonable causes out there, right? Which is consumer centric. Okay. The adult industry out there is basically extremely valued from a valuation perspective out there, right? Which has absolutely nothing to do with a lot of valuable things that are going on in the industry out there. So I'm not going to address this from a perspective that this is an encouragement of the consumer or the investor towards a certain this thing. It's just that that market has a certain kind of view. Investors look at it from a perspective of how they can recover their money. Okay, and a good return on their money out there, and they see this as a potential, they could do it out there. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Anita, and my question is actually related to chronic care management and aspects of.
If you stand up and speak, everybody can hear.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you.
So my question is related to comorbidities.
Mm-hmm.
We hear a lot about comorbidity, but we don't hear as much about the interrelationship of holistic and good life living, right? So what are the trends that you are seeing? Is there enough of data collection in this, in trying to get that holistic piece together? Or are we still at the stage of solving for multiple conditions and correlating that data?
You want to address this?
So people are working on that. I know from my days at Apixio, there are researchers who are looking at, and that's a big data problem because the reason that it's difficult to make observations that are relevant to a single set of a group with a set of particular comorbidities is that there's not enough data. There might be 3 people in the world that have this, and so understanding their outcomes is not a big data problem. And so, but as we get more and more data about more and more patients, and it's more complete, the data record is more complete, these sorts of algorithms are going to become more usable and more, have a broader effectiveness.
Question there. Yeah.
Hi, Puneet from Medongo, and one of our projects in India, my company manages, we enable 110 clinics in Delhi, serve the urban poor locations. We see a lot of patients, like 10 to 14,000 every day in a 4-hour time span. And with all this data over 4 years, we do 2 things. We help the government decide what to do, especially like how to prevent disease outbreaks. And the other is where we are helping the doctor see patients faster. Kind of our technology becomes a clinical decision support system. So my question is, because I have to talk about my company a lot, when is it big data analytics and when is it AI?
I think it's a continuum. It really is a continuum. And especially in healthcare where AI adaptation has been relatively slow, okay? I think it's more of but the data adaptation has taken place fairly well. I think it just, over time we'll see more and more.
So do they kind of feed into each other?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially the data you have sitting in your DSS.
So,
and then I know Surendra wants to make it as what is a groundbreaking or technology, AI technology, but I personally believe that AI doesn't necessarily has to be always this moonshot projects. We could take the little inefficiencies in the system right now and help that, and I think that eventually together they will solve the bigger problem.
yeah, so
Sexier to use the word AI.
I typically use AI when I'm talking about decision making.
Exactly.
When decisions come into play, then it's AI.
yeah.
Artificial.
One last question, guys. Because
Not a rule, that's right.
what's the next person?
Yeah.
Could you please elaborate on bias in the context of healthcare? Because in a general context, we understand bias, it's gender bias or racial bias, and in a lot of cases, we actually want to avoid bias.
But in healthcare, I would assume we actually want to take it as a information, right? Like if an African American has certain predispositions versus an Indian versus, so maybe give some example of bias in the context of healthcare and where it's pertinent.
So there's two things. There's variability and there's bias. Variability is just the sheer observation that groups vary. And bias is limitations that are kind of artificial based on how you build and construct what you're building in AI. So you can have the variability and use it as a piece of information, but that doesn't mean all variability should just be taken at face value as if it's indicative. So it's important to look into variability and see if it may be biased before just using that data.
So I'll just add to that. So when you look at bias in healthcare, bias always existed in healthcare. When you looked at medicine and clinical trials, okay, they were always biased towards a certain set of population, right? And that's why you have variability in the medicine's efficiency along a cross-section of population out there. The same thing happens in healthcare if you actually had a population of, let's say, to study melanoma on a white skin, right? And your algorithm builds on that, it'll probably fail with a different color of skin. In healthcare, you've got to bring sex, you've got to bring, who the person is, the ethnicity, the race, even sometimes the zip code where they are actually living out there to actually get into that. So it's a complex problem out there. But bias will be there in the healthcare environment because of these reasons.
Yeah, this was a great panel. Healthcare is a very complex topic. And the way it has evolved, it has been very interesting. Speakers will be around here, so you all are most welcome to interact with them, get to know them better, and they feel better. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.